We are almost done writing our research papers. You've made your thesis, you've written an outline, and now it's time for you to actually go ahead and write your paper and then edit it like we've talked about in class. When you're writing your paper, it's really important for you to follow your outline. There's a reason why you created the outline the way that you did. You had to first decide how many paragraphs you were going to have and how you're going to separate your thesis into different parts. Then you wrote a sentence to represent each one of those parts. Those sentences are going to be the first sentences of every one of your paragraphs. That's why those are really important. Then you also defined what kinds of facts you were going to use, different opinions you were going to try to explain in those paragraphs. Follow your outline. That is the best way for you to write your paper. Also, you'll need to use your sources. You need to use sources in every single paragraph. It can't just be from your head. It should be your ideas, but then your sources are used to back up your ideas. So you're going to be taking sentences from your sources and using them as quotes. You can use facts and statistics, but pretty much every single point that you're making, you need to back up with something from a source. I always start writing my essays by writing the middle paragraphs first. I write the introduction next and then the conclusion last. The reason why I do that is because it's difficult to introduce an essay that isn't written yet. And so I always start with where I feel most comfortable, write that paragraph first, then I go back into the introduction once I have an essay, and then I conclude it at the end. I've found that that makes my paper stronger, and a lot of my students say it works for them as well. So that's what I would recommend to you. Write those middle paragraphs first that you outlined, then introduce them, and then conclude. As you're writing, you're going to want to use transition sentences. It's important that your essay flows really, really nicely. You're not just shouting at people with a bullhorn. You're actually trying to give a coherent argument, not hit them over the head with it. Some words that are really good for that are words like however, likewise, subsequently, which means as a result of, finally, furthermore, those kinds of words. You also want to transition every sentence between paragraphs, and then as you're going from one topic to another in a paragraph, you'll need a transition sentence there as well. Additionally, you need to develop and support every point you're trying to make. That's going to include explaining every one of your ideas and then giving examples. Explanations are in your words, examples come from your sources. It's important to have both in every single paragraph. Now, as you're using your sources, you need to cite them at the end of every sentence. We call those parenthetical citations. That just means they're in parentheses. So whenever you use a fact or quote in any sentence, whether or not it's direct words from one of your sources, at the end of that sentence, you need to put in parentheses the last name of the author and the page number that that fact or quote or statistic appeared on. So here's an example of where there's a quote that's incorporated with a sentence. Part of the trouble, however, is that the mere presence of a technology-rich environment is not sufficient for enhanced teaching and learning or added value. And then there's the author's name and the page number. So this particular quote has been incorporated into the sentence. You don't have to do it that way, but it's one way to make your sentences stronger. Now, if there's no author, you're just going to use the title of the source. If it's very, very long, go ahead and shorten it, enough for the audience to know which source you're talking about. And then you need to create a bibliography entry for every source used in your paper. That's going to go at the very, very end. There are actually some very specific requirements for what you need to include in your bibliography and how you're supposed to format it. At the end of this video, you're going to do an exercise that's going to help you learn what that should look like. There are a lot more tips for using sources in your workbook. Make sure that you read them and don't just skip over them just because you watch this video. And the last thing to talk about is introductions and conclusions. I mentioned earlier that you should write them last. A couple things that you should include. For the introduction, you want to provide some background. This is a really good place to put some really general information that you wanted to put other parts in your essay but didn't quite fit with your thesis. You can state some of that information first, and then you'll end with the thesis always at the end of that first paragraph. It's going to be your last sentence of the first paragraph. You want your introduction to be somewhere between 7 and 10 sentences. And then the conclusion at the end will be shorter. It'll probably be 4 to 5 sentences. You want to review your major points and then restate your thesis in different words. Don't just use the same words. You want to mix them up a little bit. This is a great place to use interesting facts or statistics. For the skill builder, you're actually going to use some other websites. Here are some of the websites you're going to use. You'll be able to link to them directly from my website where you're watching this video. So you can find them there. What you're going to do on pages 16 to 17 of your workbook is make a draft bibliography. The final bibliography is going to have to be typed. This is for you to practice. So the first two websites there, the one from Purdue and the second from Washington, are going to help you make your bibliography. Then there's a game for you to practice different citation styles. I'd recommend that you play that game. It might help you a little bit to understand how citations fit together. Good luck with your papers. I'm looking forward to reading them.